Hello guys, welcome back to another episode. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and this message, it comes from a translation of a message that I received on Facebook, and the message reads like this. Hello brother Nashi, how are you? There is a story that I want to share with you, but please do not share this story on your other channel. I prefer that you share this story on your English channel. So I left home. It was me, my mom, my little sister. Then we had to run away from home because when we were still in Zim, before we came here to the United Kingdom, there was a lot of strange things that was happening at our home. Unfortunately, some of my siblings that I left back home, two of my brothers, they have since passed away. They passed away. It was somewhere around 2 years after we had run away from Zim, coming here to the United Kingdom with my mom. And the way that they passed away, it even stressed my mom so much that when my mom passed away, the last thing that she said to me, she just said, "It was your father. If only your father had listened to me and not gone to Mozambique so as to strengthen his businesses, I know that my children will still be alive, but they died because of your father." That is how my mom passed away. My mom passed away at a very young age. And after my mom had passed away, I had to become a mother and a big sister to my little sister, because when we came here to the United Kingdom, I was only 15 years old. Then my little sister, she was 8 years. We were just left alone in a foreign country. So I had to be mature from a very young age. As young as I was, I had to be strong for my little sister. Even now, the way that my little sister looks up to me, it is like I am her mother, because I took care of her from a very young age. The way that we escaped from Zim, it was after my father's businesses started to go down. Back in those days when Zim was still okay economically, my father had his own private taxis. These were like taxis for the rich people after they had gone out having some fun, drinking beer and everything. Then they will hire my father's taxis so that the taxis can take them back to their places. We grew up in a town which is called Mutare. It is close to Mozambique. As for our family history, my father used to tell us that we are half Zimbabwean and we are half Mozambican. Our grandfather had migrated from Mozambique coming to Zimbabwe. Then he got married to our grandmom. After my father and his siblings had grown up and when they had gotten their IDs, that is when they moved out of Mutare. They traveled all the way to Harare. At that time, it was still called Salisbury and it was still full of white people. So my father went to Harare and he was working as a cook for this other white man. And whilst he was working in Salisbury, that is when my father met my mother. But from the way that my mother told me our family history, it was like even our own grandfather, when he came from Mozambique, he had some of his ritualistic stuff, because our grandfather, we heard that he was quite a really good farmer and he used to have an orchard that was full of avocado trees. And my own mother told me that when she got married to the family, the first time that she was taken to that plot which was in Mutare, and that plot, my brother, it is still there. The last time that I heard from one of my cousin brother is that they even tried to sell that plot on Facebook. But after they had sold that plot on Facebook, that man who had bought that plot from my cousin brother, when he came back demanding for his money, and when he saw that my father and my cousin brothers, they had already used part of that money that he had given to them when they were doing that transaction, and he demanded the full refund, and they told him that it was already late since they'd used some of that money. Then he said that he will come back. But what he did is that he then later kidnapped my cousin's son when he was coming from school. And this whole thing, it was just a deal that was done in the dark, because they didn't even report the matter to the police. After they had found out that my cousin brother's son was missing, they just negotiated with that man and they made out a deal on how they were supposed to pay back that money. When my cousin brother contacted me and he told me that his son had been kidnapped, then I had to make that sacrifice so that I can provide them with the money. But if it was my father who had asked me for the money, I was not going to give him that money because of the things that he did to our family. Sometimes I do blame him. What my mom told me, sometimes I do feel sorry for my father because it seems as if he didn't even have a choice at all. He inherited everything, all of this ritualistic stuff. He inherited it from his own father. The story that my mother used to tell me about my grandfather is that the reason why my grandfather was so successful, it was because there were some rumors that my own grandfather, when he arrived in Zim, the moment that he purchased that plot, he then made a deal with this other owner of a mortuary who had a funeral parlor right there in Mutare. What my grandfather did with that dead body, it was quite horrifying, because what he did, according to our mother, is that he went to that funeral parlor and he bought a corpse, and after he had collected that dead body, he went with that dead body to his own plot. Then they buried that corpse for about Then they buried that dead body for about a day. Then they had to dig it up. Then they returned it back to the mortuary without the knowledge of the relatives of that person who was being kept at his friend's mortuary. And that ritual, it had been done somewhere in the 1980s. And that same ritual, it was performed again by my own father. And when she ran away from Zim, it really broke her heart, because at that time, my father and some of my siblings, they had gone to Harare. And when we escaped from Zim, at home, it was only my mother, me, my little sister, our maid, and our gardener. And when we ran away from home, which was in Mutare, coming to Harare so that we can go to the airport, as we left Zim, when I looked at my mom, she was really heartbroken. Until the day that she died, she was really heartbroken. And whenever she would go back home, when she would hear that something bad was happening at our home back in Zim, sometimes she will start to cry. Even now, two of my siblings, they are mentally ill. No one knows where they are staying or where they are. But from what I heard from my cousin brothers and my sisters is that once in a year, my siblings, they do come back home there in Mutare, but they do not even spend more than 5 or 10 minutes whilst standing at our gate. It is like they just come to mark the register that they are still alive. And if any of our relatives come across them when they will be in town or just walking along the highway, then immediately they would disappear. Once my cousin brother told me that there was a time when he was traveling from Harare coming to Beit Bridge, when they were parked at this township center that is called Rutenga, when they were parked at this township center that is called Rutenga, whilst they were buying some food, that is when my cousin brother came across this madman who was just walking around looking for food. And when he looked at him, he immediately knew that this was his cousin brother. The only mistake that he did is that he went back to the car so that he can inform the other people whom he was traveling with. He wanted to tell them that he had came across his cousin brother, even though he was now mentally ill. He wanted to give him some assistance because he had this habit of appearing and disappearing. But when he came back to that place where he had seen my brother, he had just disappeared. This is what happens. We have even tried to inform the police. We even tried to hire a private detective, but nothing came out because we had asked that police officer who was handling our case to act as if he was a private detective. I even sent his kids to school The only thing that I wanted was for him to track down my siblings, to be put in a place of safety, knowing that I will be able to take care of them. But whenever we hear of news that they were seen in such an area, then they will disappear. That police officer who was handling our case, I do not blame him as such, knowing that this whole thing, it involves a lot of rituals. There was this other time when he was notified that my sister, who is running mad, she was seen at the Beitbridge border post. She was trying to cross over into South Africa. But from what I heard when I spoke with him on the phone, he just said when those guys just blinked, then she just disappeared. That is the last time that me and that police officer that was handling our case ever spoke. He just said now that she is on the other side, meaning that she is now on South African territory, and it will be hard for him to track my sister down. And this thing, it gives me a lot of sleepless nights, because I don't know if my mother's children are okay, if they are safe. But what surprises us as a family is that each and every year, my sister and my brother, those ones that are running mad, they do come to our house in Mutare. Then they will just stand at our gate. They do not appear at once. We even tried to write down the dates, thinking that when they come back home, then we'll catch them so that we can take them inside the house. But what they do is that on the day that you think they will appear, they will never appear. But on the day that you will be not suspecting, that is when they will just appear. From what I heard is that they just come, then they will just stand at the gate, then they will walk away. If you try to go around the neighborhood thinking that you are going to come across them, you will never come across them. The only thing that I have heard from my relatives that are still in Zim is that sometimes when you'll be driving in town, when you look out of the window, that is when they will see my brother or my sister. My brother and my sister will be looking for food, mostly at those restaurants, and they will be picking up food from the refuse bins. And this whole thing that happened to my family, my mother kept on blaming my father because he accepted whatever ritualistic things that he was given to by his own father. And after the death of our grandfather, my mother told us that our father traveled to Mozambique. And the reason why he traveled to Mozambique, my mother didn't want to tell us, but my mother just told us that after he returned back from Mozambique, when he had gone to meet his relatives, he was suddenly a changed man. And my mother claimed that the same ritual that was performed by our grandfather, it was the same ritual that was performed by our father. Our mother told us quite a horrifying story about the ritual that our father performed, but it was the same ritual that our grandfather had performed. My father also went to the mortuary, and he did a deal with a guy who was working at a mortuary. That is how he managed to steal a dead body from the mortuary. After he had taken that corpse from the mortuary, my mother told me that she just woke up in the middle of the night because she heard that there were people that were busy digging in her yard. When she opened the window, she saw that our father and two other gentlemen, they were digging up in the middle of some banana trees. We had a very small orchard. We also had some banana trees. So my father and those men that he was working with, they were busy digging up a hole. My mom went out of the house, and when she went to the place where my father and those two men were busy digging, she was horrified to see that there was a coffin that was placed inside the orchard. When my mom confronted my father, that is when my father told my mom that the business was really going down, and it was his duty to make sure that the business that was left behind by our grandfather was not going to go broke. So he was supposed to perform this ritual, and then he begged my mother not to scream, because my mother wanted to scream the moment that my father grabbed her hand, then he dragged her to where the coffin was placed. Then my father opened up the coffin. My mom then saw that inside the coffin there was a dead woman. And from the way that my mom told me, she said that the woman who was lying dead inside that coffin, she was someone who seemed as if she had been picked up from the street. In short, that woman who was lying dead in that coffin, she was a mad woman. After my father and those guys had dug up the shallow grave, that is when they took that coffin and placed it inside that shallow grave. Then my father and those two men covered up that shallow grave. The next morning, my father told my mom that he was going to drive to Harare. At that time, my father wanted to open At that time, my father was building a guest house and he wanted some money because he kept on saying that the next big business that he wanted to do, he wanted to build a service station right there in Mutare. So early in the morning, he told my mom that he wanted to travel to Harare, but he didn't want to travel to Harare alone. He wanted to travel to Harare with some of my siblings, those two ones that are now running mad. Those are my siblings that traveled to Harare with my father. Then my other sister and my younger brother who also died after my mom and I and my little sister had ran away from home. It was only me and my little sister who did not travel to Harare with my father, whom we can say we are still alive and healthy. The rest of my siblings, those ones that traveled to Harare with my father, is either they are dead or they are mentally ill. That is why when my mom died, she was really bitter about the things that my father did. The next morning, my father left really early. I don't know why. Out of all the cars that he had, he chose to drive that car. My father had this other black Chrysler that he never drove. They are these black Chryslers that have a lot of space. They are mostly used by these funeral homes when they are carrying the dead bodies. My father had that kind of a car and he never used it. He only used it at night, and we don't know why our father bought such a car. He never wanted to be seen driving that car. That is why he only drove it at night, and it was always locked up in the garage. And me and my siblings, we used to play hide and seek in that garage, scaring each other, because we used to say that the Chrysler that my father used to own, it was used to transport dead bodies. When my father left for Harare, my mother never even bothered to wait for my father to return back. She told me and my sibling to bath and wear some nice clothes. We didn't even know where our mom was taking us to. But when we got on the bus, we knew that we were traveling to Harare. So we traveled from Mutare coming to Harare without any clothes at all. We just thought that we were going to see some of my mom's relatives because my mom was born in the capital city of Zim, there in Harare. That is where her relatives were. But I didn't even understand why my mom was such in a hurry. When we arrived in Harare, our uncle was already waiting for us with some of my mom's relatives at the bus rank, which was at Mbari at that time. Then they took us at the airport. And when they took us at the airport, I could not even understand what we were doing at the airport. The next thing that happened is that we were on the aeroplane coming to the United Kingdom as refugees. That is how I ended up here in the United Kingdom with my little sister. It has been so many years since we have been here in the United Kingdom. Our family's history, Brother Nash, it gives me a lot of sleepless nights. There are some times when I do have some fond memories of my father. There were days when we were happy, when we were still young. But when I think about all the things that my mom told me that made her to escape, it just gives me a lot of sleepless nights. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received from one of our listeners. Then I had to ask our admins to give us a translation.